Michael Vandergrift, MCV Realty Group.
Just to help our team grow and help our clients so much better, in this,
Hello, everyone. Michael Vandergrift, MCV Realty, coming to you today, covering the Indiana purchase agreement. Now, keep in mind, each state's a little different, but this is, and there are a couple different purchase agreements. This is for improved property, which means it has at least a building on it. That's what we call an improved property, and it usually has public systems, but could have septic and well. And on this, you're going to see if there is a listing broker, their office code, individual code, and then a selling broker. The selling broker represents the buyer. I know it's weird that it says selling broker, but that's one of the ways they refer to a buyer agent is as the selling broker. You always want to have the date this is created, buyer or buyers. You can have as many buyers as you want, we like to call them entities, because you could write it up under an LLC or an LP, or it could be a corporation buying a property. So it can be one or as many entities as you'd like. Then you get into different titles, and we'll go over titles how you title a property. And then you want to have in the property, the address, township, county, Indiana zip code, described as, this is the legal description that's assigned to it. It's usually like lot 223 of something. But on some country properties, it could be a quarter acre. You get some weird ones on some of the country that were old meets and bounds surveyed properties. And a lot of times when you resurvey those to get new surveys done on them, which are quite expensive if you're switching from meets and bounds, they will reassign a new legal description. And then this part right here covers personal property versus real property. Anything that is nailed, glued, screwed, or bolted to the improvement or building is considered real property. Anything attached to the land. So you got a house, so your water heater is attached. It's permanent. You need it. But other things that can be easily detached, even though your oven is normally attached by a hose or a clamp or something, depending on whether, now electric's just plugged in, but if you've got a gas stove, that falls under the definition nailed, bolted, screwed, or glued to it, because it's usually on there with a nozzle. But anything that could be taken down that's conveying, as we call it, conveying or going with the property, needs to be right here. That's usually refrigerator, microwave, stove. Kitchen appliances typically go with the home. Washer and dryer are typically negotiable. And these are major. Also, window dressings could be, because the rod's actually attached. If you've got like drapes, the rod would be what we call real property as opposed to personal property. But the drape hanging from it is personal property because it's not nailed, glued, screwed, or bolted. And then you would exclude any of the following. Say you were taking your hot tub with you and the hot tub was in the home. You'd need to put your hot tub. Or a lot of times you see refrigerators out in the garage. That would be a case where that would be there. The terms of this agreement will determine what items are included, not the seller's disclosure. The seller's disclosure is just the condition of the property. Okay. And then here's price, which is usually what people are most concerned with. But I always tell people that's only one line item on 8 pages of contingencies, as we're going to get to as we go through this right here. Earnest money is good faith money or consideration for the contract that you submit to a third party that holds it. Sometimes the listing broker holds it. Sometimes the selling broker holds it. Common anymore is we're starting to move towards title companies holding it, which I believe is easier. There's a lot of debate on that. We'll get into that further. There's an actual heated debate right now over that, whether it violates NAR ethics or not. To me, as long as they do it correctly and document it and process it the way it's supposed to be processed by the terms of this agreement, I don't care who holds it. That's my opinion. And I believe, and I'm double checking, but I believe Indiana is one of those weird states where you don't have to do earnest money because you have consideration of the house. So they're counting kind of the house and the purchase agreement as the consideration portion. But we are looking into that and see if I can get further information on that. But normally I tell clients to submit 1%. You don't want it to be too high, but you don't want to be too low. Some people only do 500. That's a market thing. You see a lot of earnest money. And that earnest money is refunded to the buyer if they get out by any one of these conditions we're going to further go over. If they break it and say, hey, I just don't want this house, it's supposed to go to the seller. Because then they would be breaking the contract and the seller would be able to keep that earnest money. That's where that earnest money comes in importance. And for the buyer, that earnest money is taken off what they need to bring to closing for their down payment and closing costs. So it's kind of like a down payment, but you can't call it a down payment because it is earnest money. There's a difference there. And then we get down to what type of payment. Are they doing cash? And then if you do cash, you can waive the appraisal, which is what makes cash so easy. Plus, there's no financing contingencies. And then we get into financing. And they pretty much go in order of significance on strength, actually, in this, because cash is number one. That's top offer. You're going to get cash, no appraisal, no inspection. I mean, that's winner chicken dinner. That's a strong offer. But then you get into new mortgages, which 80% of the market's going to finance. So 80% of buyers are going to take out a loan. You've got conventional, which is a strong buyer. You got insured conventional. You've got FHA. Insured conventional can just be more hangups on the appraiser. The appraiser may call out more repairs. And that's the strength of these is based upon the appraisal and what the appraiser will allow by their standards and what we typically see. Conventional, the appraiser is very lenient. I mean, it's got to be, if it's missing flooring on a complete level or a complete room, it can call it out and say, hey, this has got to be done before this loan's done. Now, an insured conventional, you're going to see a lot of times with investors and DSCR loans. And the appraiser can call out things kind of like what they do on an FHA. If they see something, and FHA, VA, and USDA as well are government-backed loans which have to follow HUD guidelines. They're livability guidelines. So they ensure the safety or if they call out a material defect as well. If you've got missing flooring, if you've got peeling paint, your roof and mechanicals have to have 3 years life left in them. That's what makes these a little more not as strong as a conventional, because the appraiser could call out repairs and then someone has to repair those. Doesn't necessarily mean the seller has to or the buyer has to, but somebody's got to get them done to close the deal with that financing. And then you've got, depending on their down payment, a lot of times you'll see 20%. So this would be 80% of the purchase price, be minus that. Payable in whatever the term of their loan is, 15, 30 years are typically what you see. I usually put the interest rate not to exceed market. And this was added after 9/11. Back when 9/11 happened, interest rates skyrocketed, like they tripled overnight. And a lot of people were stuck paying those higher rates. So they added this so you can put in, if you know somebody's at 6, you could put in not over 10. And then you could also limit points to, which people use to buy down their rates. You could also limit the points as well. I typically put market. And here, right here, buyer shall pay all costs of obtaining financing except. And this is where people would normally put in if the seller were to pay closing costs and prepaids. And this is where you would put in that amount. And then if the buyer is using like a USDA or there are some FHA down payment assistance programs, you would need to mark, yes, they're using a down payment assistance program. And the reason you mark that is because that makes it even further complicated, because it could have further inspections. And we don't do many assumptions, but I think we're going to moving forward. With the interest rates being so low, I think people are going to trade off on the loans that are assumable. From my understanding, mostly just government loans are assumable. Most conventionals are not. Conditional sales, never done one. Other method of payment, I guess you can buy anything with real estate. You could trade cows, trade your truck. You would need to do a financing addendum. Also, other method of payment would be one I have done is it's very rare in this hot market, but you do get some seller financing or land contracts or rent to owns, and that would be where you would use financing addendum for, or you could use conditional sales contract as well. You could use either one of those and just write it up on that addendum, which anytime you do an addendum, it's an addition to this agreement, whereas an amendment changes it. Amend to change, add, addendum to add. And then you've got your time for financing. Market right now is about 7 days to get your application in, 30 days for approval. If you're doing a VA or USDA, I'd put 45 days. Those do sometimes take a little longer. They got more bureaucracy and paperwork to push. Closing date, you can put on or before whatever day, or you can put 30 days after acceptance. You know, there's a lot of different variations you could do on the closing. The closing fee is normally shared equally, but if you really want to make a strong offer as a buyer, you can pay that as a buyer. That's another thing that raises the net. So why price is not, I mean, it is one of the most important things, what the offer price is, but another thing you could do to help that offer price, to offer a lower offer, is pay that closing fee. And that thing's only about $250, $300 for most title companies. So that's not a huge fee. This contingency on if you are selling your house and need to sell your house to finance this or to use the cash from it, you would have to, is contingent upon that transaction and put it in there. If it's not contingent on any other property, you put is not contingent. And then you've got first right, you've got other addendums you could do, first right contingency, a limited purchase contingency, which we'll go over in another video. I want to make sure this year to cover every form that the IAR has, and I'm going to try to knock out 2 of these a week. I thought I'd do this one first since it's the one most people use. Possession typically in this market is at closing, which I know makes it difficult for people. 10 years ago, you could get 30 days, and that used to be the norm. You could ask for anything. You can also charge rent right here. This first one, possession, where you can charge them so much a day for rent, or if they stay over, they're welcome. They've got to pay that. And then you've also got liquidated damages here. Usually on these 2, I try to make them pretty high. I usually go about $200 to make sure to get them out of the house, or you know your buyer's going to get money at $200 a day. Maintenance of the property states that the property should be in as good or better condition than when you made the offer, which also reflects upon, that's where the seller's residential sales disclosure comes into play. And I've got another video on that if you want to watch on that. Home heating fuel, you run into this a lot on rural properties with a propane tank. City properties, you just put not applicable, but most of the time we just put it to be included in the sale, so you don't have to go out and measure it, find out what market price is. Because you put will be purchased, then what price is it? Is it the price they bought it? Last year we had an issue where propane really jumped up in price, and that caused an issue. Well, I only paid this for it. That's all I'm reimbursing it. I think the guy had filled his tank for like $500, but now it was $1,100 to fill the tank. So, and to him, $600 was a lot of money, which, you know, as your agent, I always fight for every dollar like it's my own. So I kind of make a fuss about it too. It's $600. Surveys are especially important when you're on old meets and bounds systems, lake properties, rural properties. Typically, you don't really need one if you're on a platted lot in a subdivision. And then who pays for it? Is it the seller's expense or shared equally? Typically, the market dictates that the seller is going to pay the expense, because if this deal falls through, that buyer has no need for your survey. So, but the buyer could pay for it. That's another thing that makes your offer stronger, is when you're saying, hey, I'm going to pay for a survey. Even if the deal falls apart, I bought you a survey. Flood area is another important thing. May or may not. You got to watch it, especially a lot of lake properties are in flood zones. So you have to mark, and this is just in case they get a really high insurance quote on it, which you've really got to shop your rates on those, because I believe they're all backed by FEMA, but different agencies charge different prices on flood insurance. And you also have options of getting it surveyed and getting a letter of map adjustment or a letter of map correction to take it out of the floodplain, flood area. I've seen people split properties when you're on like a water, like a lake or a river, and split into 2 lots. So the one lot down by the river or lake, is in the floodplain, but the house is no longer in it. So there's things like that you can do to get around that. Building limitations. This is because we've had so much issue with homeowners associations banning rental properties and people running businesses out of their homes too that their homeowner association doesn't allow. So we kind of make this clear to agents and consumers that you've got to mark what you're using the property for. Who enforces that? Who knows? Homeowners insurance is typically, I'll call them back. Typically, homeowners insurance, I usually put 10 days, but that's ask your lender how quick they need it, but they usually need it pretty soon. And some lenders require that you get homeowners insurance on a property you are purchasing while this purchase agreement is not closed yet. So I have seen that as well. Then we get to inspections, and this is big. And we saw a lot in 2021, 2022 of people waiving inspections to win homes. And, I'm going to cover, there's an economics paper on the rate of lemons that I'm going to cover that covers this a little bit. That's for another video I've got on my list to do. But you've got three options here. You can waive the right, or you have no right to inspections. You're taking the house how it is, what it is. And that makes your offer very strong. But it poses the risk of, what if there's something you can't see or an inspector would have found? You're stuck with the home. You're in a contract. You also could do buyer reserves the right to have inspections, which then you get down here to the inspection response. Or you could do as is, and usually you'll give a time period on the as is. And if you do an as is with the as is addendum, which we'll cover in another video, you do not fill this part out. This inspection response period is only if you reserve the right. Now, if you do, you're going to say how many days for you to get inspections, which the market being as fast as it is right now, it's about 10. A couple years ago, it was 15. So that will change with the market. So you want to make sure your agent understands the market and what it's calling for. Scope of the inspection, this lists what all you can expect, or you can add other things if there's something else. The most common thing is pool, to get the pool checked out, because I don't think pool is on here. And then there's an additional inspection time, which I usually put 5 days. Sometimes you'll see 7 for additional days. And that's if your general home inspection finds something and they say, hey, we need to have an expert electrician come in or a plumber come in. We see an issue here, but we're not sure what it is. It gives you additional time, and you have to fill out a form to request this, but it gives you additional time to further inspect the home and see if you find any defects. And then it covers what defects are, health, safety. Also was added this year of kind of clearing out, trying to find where it is. I know there's been a lot of problem of finding licensed people in certain areas, because like a painter, there's no real licensing for a painter. It used to say in here, shall order all independent inspections after acceptance of the purchase agreement. Buyer shall have seller additional inspection responses identified, defect defined, inspection buyer releases harmless from anything. Here it is, B. They changed the wording here in buyer reserves in this: conducted by licensed independent inspectors or qualified independent contractors selected by buyer within the following time periods. And that's been changed because sometimes people have their dad or uncle who's an electrician or thinks he is do it, and it's supposed to be done by a licensed or qualified inspector. So they did update that to add that in there. Limited home warranty program. A lot of times people like these are usually $500-600 a year. You can ask for one or will not be provided. Will not, of course, is going to be the stronger offer for a buyer. Will, and who pays for it, who orders it, and who pays for it. I had one time where the buyer ordered it and paid for it, and or did the order and paid for it. And I was like, why'd you even put it on there? I didn't quite, and the agent could not even give me a rational, logical explanation. So yeah, if you were the buyer and you're just going to buy it, just get it. Disclosures, making sure you've seen those. If the home's built before 1978, it needs a lead-based paint certification. Every home, barring a few exemptions, auctions, estates, trusts, need a seller's residential real estate sales disclosure, signed at the time of the offer and signed at closing. Title approval, title insurance, which protects you from any liens or encumbrances that may come in the future. Always recommend this. You could get burnt. I got a buddy who's got a house down on Lake Avenue that he can never sell because the government's going to take it as soon as he's done, because the tax lien on it is higher than what it's worth, and it grows at like 30% a year. So that house will never be worth more than that tax lien, and it will be a rental till he dies. So it's always important to get that title insurance. Now, who pays for it? Typically on the owner's title insurance, the seller pays for it. This is once again another area where you can increase the net, and the buyer could pay the owner's title policy for him. Usually that's somewhere around $1,200. It's going to vary depending on the offer and the amount. Lender's title is typically paid by the buyer. Parties agree that whoever's going to order title, whether it's a seller, buyer, immediately. And typically you have the right to order it if you're paying for it. But when you split it, then it gets confusing, but you can still select here, and it is negotiable. You know, just like these title fees are negotiable. I had a buyer once, he's a cash buyer, and he said, I'm paying this for the house, and the seller's paying everything. So he made the seller pay. And I had the agent call me, I've been doing real estate 20 years. I ain't never seen this. And so my buyer says he's paying the $217,000 for the house, and that's what he's paying. And he still thought he could write a check, which you can't. You know, that comes into a title thing of anything over 10,000 needs to be wired. He was mad about that too when I made him have to go and do the wire. And then taxes. This first box is typically for construction properties. This used to be ABC, I think, but it's 2. 2 is prorated, which is what we normally. No, 3 is for construction. I'm sorry. This 1 is if the buyer wants to be really aggressive with the offer and once again raise the net for the seller and pay their taxes for them. So it's another way you can make your offer stronger, is by assuming and paying all the taxes on the property, beginning with the taxes due. But normally what we see is the prorated, and then on new construction you need to mark this 3 because it gets really weird, because it goes from land where the taxes are really low to jumping up with the new improvement on the property with the new build. Proration, special assessments, just goes through some legal stuff here. Timeline. Homeowners Association covenants and restrictions need to be given to the buyer. Usually I'll put 7 days and then 5 days for any other, if there's any other documents that need to be approved or checked. Say the wife's doing a beauty salon in the house. You got to make sure that that association will allow that. Some associations will not allow home-based businesses or rental properties too. And a lot of times what's happening now is agents are putting them up with the listing, and they're also making you sign a form that says you've seen those covenants and restrictions. Do not rely, and it is not the title company's job. I've seen that said before. It's not. It's your agent's job to make sure they have done their due diligence. Now, if they use the title company for it, that's fine. But it is not the title company's job to make sure you understand and have those covenants and restrictions. That is your agent's due diligence job. Attorney fees, additional provisions. Conveying of this property shall be, typically most properties are conveyed with general warranty deed, but some of them are joint title with survivorship. You can do things like that. There's several different ways, and I need to get a title rep on here. So some title rep get with me, do a video on the different ways you can convey title, because I know there are quite a few ways you can. Making sure they're not a foreign person, which you have to check up the top. That's on a seller. On the listing, you have to mark foreign person, because you've got to pay. They've got to hold back money for taxes on foreign persons. Then down here is where buyer discloses to seller if they hold a real estate license, because you have to disclose that. Further conditions. I think too many people write too much stuff in here. I try to refrain from that. Although last year appraisal gaps were so common that the IAR issued out language just to put in here to avoid adding the addendum, but there is an appraisal gap addendum, first right contingency addendums. Usually what people will put in these further conditions is see other addendums. Or another common one to make your offer more aggressive and ask for inspections is I put in buyer will not ask for any inspection repair under $1,500 unless it is a state recognized material or safety defect. So what that's pretty much saying is that we're not going to nitpick you. That's what some people can do. You can get an inspection response that's got like 40 things on it, you know, a broken light switch, you know, stuff that's not a safety or material defect of the home. And it kind of prevents that. So make sure your offer stronger. Let them know that your buyer's not going to nitpick them. If it is a limited or what we call dual agency where the buyer is represented by the seller as well, a limited agency form needs to be filled out by all parties and needs to be marked on here as is a limited agency or is not. And then an offer needs to expire. Although sometimes we've been not putting them on there, just saying, hey, you fill it out on the counter because you have as long as you want because we want the house. But technically, you should have a beginning and an end to a contract. And then buyers sign. Sometimes you've got another form you can do to add on more signatures if you have more than 2 buyers, because there are cases where that has happened. And then the seller would respond with, there's 4 options you got when you get an offer as a seller. You can accept it, reject it, counter, or you can let it expire. Some agents get upset about the expire thing, but I do it quite frequently. I always communicate with the agent, let them know what's going on. But a lot of times just to save my clients from having to sign and going through the struggle, because some people aren't as good with DocuSign and these electronic signings as others, I just let it expire. So it just depends on the client. But agents do like to at least be rejected. So that is the purchase agreement in a nutshell. Please comment below. Let me know if you have any further questions, want to go into anything more in detail. I know I skipped through a lot of the legal stuff right there, but I don't want to bore you too bad. I just want to give a rough overview. And everybody have a great day. Grace and peace.